Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest instalment of the UK&I VCF enablement series. Today we've got Atif talking around vDefend security, and Atif will go into that very shortly. But before we get into that, I just wanted to remind everyone of an event that's taking place in March in Amsterdam. It's not an event that is sponsored by or controlled by Broadcom. It's the VMUG Connect, so it's an independent event. It is a paid-for event, and it's taking place in Amsterdam on March the 17th to the 19th. You can see that the prices to join it, to attend the event, and you've got the link to actually the register or see who the presenters are and all the sessions that are currently organised. So with that, Atif, I'm going to send it over. It's over to you now to run us through vDefend. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. Thank you, Andy. And thanks everyone for joining. So it is an ongoing series of VCF enablement series. My name is Atif Kadir. I'm based in UK and I am a principal solution architect, and my SME area is vDefend. The topic today is quite broad, so we've called it as "You cannot protect what you cannot see." And over the course of this session, we will actually talk about all aspects of security and how vDefend can actually assist you with the protection from a defense and depth perspective. So from a Broadcom perspective, I've been in the company prior to Broadcom VMware acquisition for last 11 years. My SME area is vDefend, and I sit in application network and security division inside Broadcom. And the two areas we focus is vDefend and AVI, which is our application delivery controller, which is GSLB, load balancer, WAF, internal WAF. So the focus today is going to be on vDefend, and we augment all the security function and design principles on top of VMware Cloud Foundation. So just to quickly set the scene, so vDefend focus is to offer protection against zero-day vulnerabilities. We then start to exploit advanced use cases from virtual patching to east-west security, from granular controls and distributed in nature, minimize or restrict lateral movement. Avi's focus is around positive security enforcement, bot management, web application firewall. So we basically glued both of those together, from the traffic coming from the web into your east-west territory, which is the VM, and that is what we're going to explore today. However, again, the focus is going to be on the vDefend. So I have a question, and you can, of course, type it in the chat as well, that what happens when you peel an onion, right? So I'll give you 5 seconds to answer that if you want to, or you can answer it in your heart as well. I am looking at the chat. And typically what happens is that, it'll make you cry, right? And the reason it'll make you cry is that, when you cut it, the damage releases, irritant chemicals. The deeper you cut, the stronger the reaction is. And to reach the core, you must accept increasing pain and effort. And what I'm trying to say is that each layer an attacker touches or trigger, detection and response, the deeper access and more noise and cost and risk is involved. And this is the analogy we use, in cybersecurity all the time. And we start to, morph it out and map it to, MITRE tactics and MITRE attack framework. And that is, the analogy we use. I'm not sure if you're aware that because of this pain that is going in, the defense industry, particularly the cyber warfare, the Home Office actually launched a legislative proposal to counter ransomware based on, the type of attacks we saw in UK last year, from retail industry to, other different, verticals as well. And the remit of this legislative proposal was, which has now concluded as of 8th of April, is a deterrent. And what that means is that if this becomes a law, and this is still work in progress, no UK organization will be allowed to be hacked or breached. And if you're hacked or breached or compromised, then you're not going to pay the bad guy. You would always revert to your backups from a business continuity and disaster recovery perspective, and not pay the bad guy in terms of crypto or ransomware money. And because government had enough, and the number of breaches were, exponentially going high in volume, they had to put some measures in place. So when we look at some of our, European counterparts, these processes are, far more pronounced and, set in stone type of scenarios as well. So it's effectively a deterrent. And what that means is that, if a kid wakes up in the morning and goes to like a chatbot like ChatGPT, or pick up Sonnet or Claude or something, and uses an SDK to create an exploit just for the sake of it, they would know that even if they hack an organization, they're not going to get any money, because there's a law in place as well. So something to be mindful of as well. Why are we doing it? From a VCF perspective, from a VMware Cloud Foundation perspective, we want to make sure that the platform, which is your private data center, which is provided by VMware Cloud Foundation, is hardened, as well as the applications you're going to host on this architecture provide you with end-to-end security from all angles as well. We can then start to look at techniques such as offense and defense type of capabilities as well. So what do we see in today's security realities? So basically, there are two main parts. So one is the unmitigated risks, and the other one is the operational efficiency. And the reason around, it's all amazing, what I'm going to tell you around vDefend, that it's amazing to, introduce these technologies and solutions in place. But the operational efficiency is where, the lengthy develop time basically, kicks in. And then we see a lot of blind spots in visibility. And that is the topic today, which is, you cannot protect what you cannot see. So because the fact everything is in the virtual form factor on VCF with vSphere, with VCF networking, we can bring a plethora of telemetry, and then we do interesting things on top of that to make sense of that information. So what does a typical attack look like these days? So someone somewhere will be fooled or spoofed by a malicious email that says that you want a £10 or $10 Amazon voucher. This is exactly what the bad guy wants. Someone will be spoofed by a fake domain name, such as something pretending to be Google, but it's not. So like a DGA activity. And that is where the bad guy needs initial access. And what you see here, in this illustration, are all the techniques, or most of the techniques that are used in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Once that initial access is enabled, the bad guy actually wants to make sure that persistence is there. They don't want that if that endpoint, which could be a VDI, could be a virtual machine, virtual server, or even a physical endpoint, is rebooted, they lose access. They need persistence from that perspective. And this is where they expedite the payload, which is the malware. Once they have the command and control, they start to exploit the inner workings of a data center or an organization, which is lateral movement. And what then happens is that they find that asset, and it could be as small as a spreadsheet, and as small as a JPEG image, and as large as a complex database with a lot of details around individuals. They would always encrypt the data, because that's where the money is, and then they will exfiltrate it out to basically ask for money after they've sabotaged the system. So what we typically see is that in the industry, before an organization finds out the bad guys inside your organization, is about 204 days. And we saw with the IBM, which was 274 days, which was the worst one, where IBM did find out that there was a compromise, and it was a ransomware attack, and it was all about brand reputation and all the things that happen as part of cyber warfare. So what we are saying is that we don't want that you are watching movies and the bad guys sitting in your house looking at and eating popcorns at the same time. This is the thing you don't really want to see, right? So if that bad guy is eating popcorns, the next thing she is going to do is basically expedite an attack, introduce a payload, and this is where you will see a message on a machine or number of machines where they're basically asking for crypto money. They're basically blackmailing you that they will actually delete your data, and this is where we want to have detection techniques and protection techniques inside your private data center so that we can take an informed decision, right? So that is the whole narrative around the vDefend initiative. But we also understand that it is quite hard to segment and uh, slice and dice a typical data center, particularly in a brownfield environment. And the question customers typically ask or start scratching their head is that where should I start, what are my goals, and what are the areas I need to focus? Because when we look at an application, applications are distributed in nature. An application could be app web db. An application would always require shared services, common services like ad, ntp, and dns. And then here we are just talking about virtual machines. What about containers as well, which are ephemeral in nature? What about pod to pod security? What about namespace level security? So it all starts to get very, very complex when start to actually isolate traffic or a per VM level, or even try to create a classification of a microsegment. Now, to explain that, you know, there are, agent-based solutions out there in the market. Their fallback mechanism is, Windows Firewall for Windows-based systems and IP tables for Linux-based ecosystems. And what really happens is once that virtual machine or is compromised, the bad guy basically switches off that agent and then have, full control over what they do on that particular host and exploit and expedite, at the advanced warfare tactics. We believe that we can actually do it better. So we port that capability inside the hypervisor, which is ESXi. And to explain all of that, if we go back in time to roughly 2007, and even before that as well, when it used to be, ESX, and later on it became ESXi. When you install ESXi on x86 hardware and create your first virtual machine, the virtual machine has to communicate to the rest of the world through a standard switch. And that standard switch, if that ESXi participates into vSphere, then you have the management plane on top of that. You convert that standard switch into VDS, and that's the reason you see that in the illustration. There is actually an IO chain process that is baked into every single virtual machine's VNIC that exists in your setup. What that means is that every packet that will go egress and ingress will be subject to this IO chain DV filter. So for example, slot number 0 has existed for a long time. Slot number 0 is switch security module, SSM. So it is responsible for maintaining all the telemetry as the virtual machine changes its boundary from one VM to another. And that basically also creates the symmetry that move this slot posture with this VM as it changes its boundary. It's very unique to VMware. Slot number 1 is we always had an opportunity to apply ACLs, and we also realized that ACLs is actually a complex way of handling security, but we always had the opportunity to do that. Fast forward into 2012, we acquired Nicira, which then later on became NSX. We used the same IO chain architecture and increased the number of slots from 10 to 16, so 0 to 15. Now, back in the day, we didn't had advanced security feature capability. However, NSX provided, layer 4 and layer 7 firewall capabilities, stateful in nature. So what that means is that every packet that is going egress and ingress that needs to, hit that virtual machine will be subject to those slots that provide different functions. And if we look under the hood, slot number 2 is that provides you with that distributed firewall rule. It also then provides you with IDS IPS capability. It's distributed in nature. Why it's distributed in nature? Because every single virtual machine's VNIC is effectively a firewall now. And there is no running away from this architecture, because if we don't have a VNIC in a virtual machine and we don't have a physical NIC or a PNIC in a physical machine, then we'll not have any problems, right? Life will be a lot easier. But the reality is that these VMs have to interact and create, move traffic, packets from, A to B. Now, slot number 4 and slot number 5 provide, malware prevention systems, which is MPS. So what happens is if someone opens a file inside that virtual machine, it'll be detonated. It will be subject to static, detonation and dynamic detonation. So where we do the sandboxing of that, file, we provide the same memory and CPU footprint to augment and understand what is the behavior of the file. And depending on the behavior of the file, it will be quarantined or allowed. So we provide different type of capabilities. And what this means is that, this IO chain is basically the DNA of ESXi networking, something that you need to remember. It's very unique to VMware. And what that also means is that sometime we will have multiple VNICs, virtual NICs in a single VM, and which is a normal thing to do. It means that every single VNIC will have its unique IO chain slot posture to augment the security story that we are going to exploit as we move on. So something to be mindful of. What happens? This is a zoomed out view. So the traffic goes from a virtual machine into the DV filter. And like any other firewall, NSX and vDefend combined is basically a layer 4 stateful firewall. The packet is exposed to context table, the flow table, the rule table, and address set. And depending on the behavior that is prescribed, the packet will be allowed, denied or dropped. The same way, we have a multiplexer inside the hypervisor, and that multiplexer can do signature-based hashing as well, which is IDS-IPS. And that's, again, very unique to VMware, where we basically can actually handle the signatures through the profile methodology. We've got the concept of security groups, and we dynamically map everything to different type of artifacts as well. And that's how we actually minimize the CPU footprint against the IDS hashes that we expedite. So what that means is that every single virtual machine has a firewall attached to it at the VNIC. And because of that, we can actually mingle the machines together and create a complex manifest. So I speak to the customers who are as small as like 3 host-based architectures to big banks with hundreds and thousands of, virtual machines and hosts on top of that. And you can mingle the things together. So for example, one VM could be a DMZ machine, and the next VM could be another virtual machine of any other nature, providing a different type of function altogether, yet they are isolated from each other using distributed firewall at the VNIC level. And as the virtual machine changes its boundary from one host to another, it carries its slot posture because the VNIC has to move with the virtual machine. So what happens in, from a licensing perspective in vDefend? So when you buy VCF, VMware Cloud Foundation, you have to buy the vDefend license as an add-on. So VCF does not give you any security functionality out of the box. So what the vDefend license gives you is, all those things that we're going to talk about, starting from distributed firewall to container security. And that is something to be mindful of as well, that, how the licensing works. When we look at the full stack in terms of what that license capability offers you, the way to look at this slide is to basically look from the right, at the bottom. So we start from distributed firewall. So distributed firewall, I've already explained, it is, at per VNIC level, virtual machine level, where we can do layer 4 to layer 7, firewall, stateful firewall. We can do FQDN filtering, geo filtering. We can actually do identity-based, firewall capability as well. You integrate DFW, vDefend with Active Directory, and it becomes identity-based firewall, which is a very strong use case for VDI. We can do malicious IP blocking. Gateway firewall is interesting as well. So as much as, you can protect your east-west, we also provide the edges that are realized in a VCF architecture, such as, tier 0s and tier 1, to augment and control the ingress and egress point into, top of rack switch as well. So that also provides you classical firewall-like capabilities. And this is where we can do IDS, IPS, but not distributed in nature. And this is where the sizing of the gateway firewall becomes very, very important. On top of that is the main element, which is the advanced threat prevention. So we can do IDS, IPS, which could be distributed or at the edge from a tier 0, tier 1 perspective. We can do malware prevention. So if someone basically opens a file, it will be detonated, and depending on the behavior of the file, will do that. So that's network sandboxing. We can do network anomaly detection. So if you're thinking where the vDefend brand's coming from, we acquired a company called Lastline, which is a tap and span based technology a few years ago. And they had a product called Lastline Defender, where we can actually, look at any switching vendor, mirror the flows, and run unsupervised machine learning to look at the behavior of the flow. For example, this flow from A to B, virtual machine looks normal, but then there is this beacon, an additional flow that is trying to establish a connection to an outbound source, which is happening every 15 minutes, and that's an anomaly. So basically the unsupervised machine learning would look at different type of detectors that we have in the system. Fast forward into recent times, we've actually morphed that capability inside ESXi. Now every ESXi is basically a sensor, which is the tap and span based, and this is where we used the Lastline Defender's name and merged into vDefend, if you're thinking about the branding. And behind the scenes, it's the same original code base that has went through a lot of evolution and innovation from that perspective. So that is advanced threat prevention. On top of that, this middle one is the security intelligence. Security intelligence sits on our data lake, which is basically called security services platform. The security services platform is deployed, then you activate security intelligence. Security intelligence is to make your day-to life easier. So it helps you with your security assessment. So it gives you an immediate view of where you stand with your east-west security, along with what is the blast radius for X, Y, Z VMs. So we will see that in the demo as well. Real-time traffic visibility, rule analysis, rule recommendation. This is where most customers actually struggle to start the journey, that what application should I start to micro segment, or even go into a macro segmentation type of thing as well. On top of that, everyone's talking about AI powered threat analytics. So we live in the world of chatbots these days. So we have a chatbot as well, and the chatbot is basically harnessing all of that data set inside this ecosystem, so that you can ask questions and you can actually look at a real attack as it is happening to understand what is happening from that perspective. And I have a quick demo to show you how it looks like. There's a quick question: does service insertion third-party firewall part of vDefend VCF9? So basically, just quickly to answer that question, so I don't leave it behind, we did actually have the service insertion and third-party capability. But what really happened was that over time, we continued to develop those capabilities in-house. So we used to support Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Trend, Fortinet, FortiGate type of ecosystems. Fast forward into last 2 years, it was a dual certification program, and that basically meant that we had to certify that third party. The third party had to certify us, and we continued certifying the third party vendors. But because of the competition, they stopped certifying us, to the point the product management decided to deprecate that. So the code base still has the support for those ecosystems, just so that you can upgrade to later version of VCFs, not VCF9, but VCF 5.2. But then from a support perspective, you're not supported. So we've deprecated the support of that ecosystem, because we provide all of those capabilities in this screen that you're looking at from a licensing capability perspective feature set. Okay, so advanced threat prevention, right? So advanced threat prevention is all centered around NDR. So whatever I'm telling you today is all centered around NDR, which is network detection and response. We basically look at IDS, IPS signatures. We do look at telemetry, sync up and look up around network sandboxing and NTA events, which is network traffic analysis events as well. And then that is our NDR. So this vDefend is not an EDR solution, something to be mindful of as well. So everything is centered around NDR from that perspective. So what we can do is we can do distributed IDS IPS. That means that we can run use cases like virtual patching. We can actually mitigate compliance. To explain virtual patching in a better way is that we all are aware, and it's an industry-wide problem, that most organizations today have legacy operating systems from Microsoft, and sometimes you are paying extended support to Microsoft. And it does not stop there. The same problem applies to Linux-based, artifacts and virtual machines on operating systems as well. And what really happens is that when your security teams run, vulnerability scans, such as, Qualys or Rapid7, Tenable, they all do the same, they work the same way. Those basically highlight those legacy operating systems as vulnerable assets. And the fact that, we can do everything at the VNIC level from a security perspective, we can actually introduce signatures for Windows and Linux-based vice versa, and create a layer of defense around it with distributed firewall, augmenting the signatures that can, affect those vulnerable assets with the CVs or CVSS scores. So fast forward, a rule is introduced. Profiles have, the signatures for legacy virtual machines or operating systems. When you run a scan again, the scanner would know that this is actually a vulnerable, operating system, but the scanner will not be able to highlight those vulnerabilities that it was 20 minutes ago before you introduced the firewall rule. However, what you will see is the security intelligence and NSX manager UI will just go red, telling you that, I have protected you against XYZ vulnerabilities. So that is the concept of virtual patching. Now, the virtual patching could also be flipped into an in-date operating system type of scenario where a patch is available, but not most of the organizations are able to apply the patch in real time. Log4j could be one such example where, the patch was available, but organizations could not apply the patch to the vulnerable, operating systems because of the change control process, because of the red team and all the bureaucracy that happens in an ITSM system. So again, we know how Log4j can affect those, virtual machines. So again, we add the signatures for Log4j in the profile for Linux and Windows-based systems. And now you have a blanket protection against Log4j. You can patch those as assets in your own time. And then eventually, if you want, you can get rid of that firewall rule as well, or basically minimize the scope and the reach of that firewall rule from an applied to perspective. So that is virtual patching, and distributed IDS IPS is basically just classical IDS IPS, but distributed in nature. So that's an illustration around, multiple unpatched systems can be patched using virtual patching. That's what I was talking about. From a malware prevention service perspective, we see file-based attacks, right? So that means it's a physical footprint of a file, a payload that exists, on operating system. So we can detect and prevent files of different, file extensions. But now the bad guys are getting clever, right? So the bad guys, if the virtual machine is compromised, will log into the system, and then they would start to find any command line system that exists on that virtual machine, start to run VB scripts, start to run PowerShell type of commands to create in memory runtime code that just exists inside your RAM. And what that means is that they can then move laterally east west, and there is no footprint. So we can now look at fileless attacks as well from malware detection perspective as well. So I talked about ATP, and we talked about last line defender. So basically the last line defender is where the tap and span based technology. So this is where we run unsupervised machine learning. We look at the anomalous network activity on your NSX based architecture, which could be VLAN backed or overlay backed, irrespective of that, and then take informed decisions. And we've got 14 detectors that look at different type of anomalous activity, starting from DGA to other type of spoofing techniques. So these are the detectors going from DNS tunneling to server port profiler, commonly used ports and different type of things. A full list is available on the VMware websites, Broadcom's website documentation. So what we are trying to say is that once you realize a VCF architecture, we can actually provide a SOC operation. We can actually push all these logs to your SIEM as well, and we can actually expedite a full, ATP and NDR scenario to basically protect the whole VCF architecture end to end by combining these technologies and solutions in this ecosystem. So we can do virtual patching. I've just explained that we can achieve compliance. That is combination of DFW and IDS IPS, and that can give us protection against zero-day attacks from that perspective. We can protect virtual machines. I've explained that already. We can protect containers as well. So for that, we have our own CNI, which is Entria, where we can actually provide, pod level security, namespace level security. And then we can also provide, bare metal based server-based systems as well. Now, as much as I was talking about that, agent is not an amazing thing. The only method for us to for a bare metal server to participate into the security data plane from a vDefend perspective is by pushing an agent into bare metal server, and then that bare metal server can have the same policy that could be applied end to end. To set this up, as how it looks like, so we have the internet traffic. That's where you would always have some level of GSLB type of activity. We never say you remove your perimeter firewall because we are mindful that you would always have a virtual infrastructure as well as classical bare metal server, could be mainframes as well. But once you are in the green zone, which is this whole VCF boundary or even a vSphere boundary with NSX, you have AVI to provide you with the load balancing capability. This is where we can do internal WAF, external WAF, load balancing, GSLB, and those type of artifacts and use cases. And once you are in that world, you have the gateway firewall. So the gateway firewall would provide you with zone-to-zone controls. That is traffic going from your east-west into your north-south top of rack switch. We then have distributed firewall. The DFW will provide you with east-west controls, and then we can augment it with IDS IPS. And that is what ATP basically offers, all centered to protect that application server, which could be a VM container-based ecosystem or a bare metal server. So we pull telemetry from all of these ecosystems, and that is what security intelligence gives us. And that is, the story today. You cannot protect what you cannot see, because by pulling telemetry from all of those ecosystems, we have got heap of telemetry to make sense of the information so that we can take an informed decision. Now, before I go into the security services platform in detail, I will run a quick demo how all of those things actually hang together. So if you give me 1 second, I'll just run a quick demo. So what you see here is basically the security services platform UI, where we have activated security intelligence. And I'll cover that the flow of the whole architecture in a minute. So for the purpose of the demo, what we have done is we have activated all the services, all the capabilities that I talked about earlier. But we're just running the IDS IPS in detect mode, not in IPS, which is protect as well. Because if I was running in protect and I'm going to expedite a real attack here, my demo will not flow. So for the purpose of that, I have to do it in a certain way. So out of box, what you see is the symmetry of how all the virtual machines hang together. We can then look at unprotected flows, the block flows, and allowed flows. So out of box, when you realize establish a greenfield deployment, and you start to create applications and deploy virtual machines that provide then become part of applications, you will see this type of view. So what we then do is we apply a filter saying IDS with severity high. The minute I do this IDS severity high, it zooms out and just focuses on the things which need attention. So signatures that have been triggered and could be malicious in nature, and we'll explore that. So what we can see from the naming convention is that it's a VDI server talking to an AD server. It has connection into the public space. Then there is this file server, a back server. Just by looking at the naming convention, you start to think that something is not right. We can click on each of this artifact in security intelligence, and it will reveal the detail around that. So if I zoom this up, it's telling me it's a Microsoft Windows machine, and this particular signature iced ID was triggered. At this point, I don't know what iced ID is. So system is basically educating me, and what it's doing, it's telling me that from a MITRE tactic and a MITRE technique perspective, it's a command and control and an encrypted C2 instance. It's also giving me some information around it's a bot, banking Trojan, and the information stealing malware, and has evolved into this. We can see that how the traffic is established from the source and destination on which ports, and then the throughput of that payload that the bad guy has been doing. Like I said, we've been running it in detect only mode and not prevent, because I want to move forward with the demo. So here we see the bad guy has been doing some damage for a while, sniffing, doing different type of activities, which we'll see in a minute. And what we then do is, like I said, we have a chatbot. So I'll start, intelligent assist. Intelligent assist will look at this particular campaign. And then within this campaign, now I am actually asking questions like you would to chat GPT or any other ecosystem. And it'll proactively start to give you, the questions you will ask, explain this event to me. And this is where, it's basically explaining in more detail how the attack, emerged. It's basically telling us that it was likely compromised through a one node file attachment, which was used as a Leo, resulted in download of iced ID DLL, and then it was executed. And it does, which basically tells me that it was a multi-vector attack. My obvious question is, how can this be remediated? So what I do is basically say that, yeah, how can this be remediated? Would you like me to create a policy? So it is then giving me a policy. And what it's doing is that we know already from a IDS IPS perspective that the policy is in place, but it detect only, the firewall rule. So all it's recommending me to do is move it from detect into protect. So you have both IDS and IPS. The minute we move into IPS, we've basically mitigated the live attack as it was happening. We move forward, and now we need to be in front of our our CISOs or the cyber team inside the organization, and need to explain how that attack unfolded. We then go in and open a campaign. A campaign could be combination of different subsets, and we basically correlate all of that. So we can see that there were 10 signatures that were matched. There were 4 attempts of malicious file transfer, 2 suspicious attempts of traffic. These are the indicators of compromise. So we know what iced ID is. Basically, it's a banking Trojan. Cobalt strike was used. So as much as the good guys in the cyber use it to their advantage, the bad guy use it to their advantage as well. RDP protocol was used, and RDP is one such protocol which everyone wants it, but we sometimes don't know how to actually protect against RDP as well. And one of my colleagues actually says that RDP should be rebranded to ransomware deployment protocol, which I don't doubt is the case. Suspicious data was uploaded, and then they used Nokoyawa, which is an encryption technique, to encrypt the data before it was exfiltrated out. These are the 4 virtual machines that we saw that in that spider web. And what we then do is we map it out to the MITRE tactics and techniques that were exploited as a result of this whole campaign. We can then click on more detail to look at what really happened in the attack. So we can see the London EMP VDI 14, which then became the patient 0. iced ID was executed. The bad guys started to manipulate the AD, went to the AD-ID server. This ran more scripts. Malicious payload was created, started doing vertical port scans. That's how they got to the file server, backup server, and started to run more scripts and different type of multi-vector attack as it unfolded. So we can click on each of this object to look at the workload summary, or the type of script that was used to damage the system, and click on each of this artifact. So here we can see that, we can look at, malware family, malware class, the MD5, the SHA, the UUIDs, and all those details, and can go into individualized view reports as well to understand what was happening. So we've mitigated the attack. We've actually explained it to our, cyber function, how the attack was happening. We now need to create a micro-segment. So we pick up the VM, run the WAN. In a real environment, you will run multiple, discoveries because we have the flow knowledge inside, security services platform with the help of, security intelligence. We run a discovery. The discovery will go in, and basically what it'll do is create a policy for you. And it'll basically, the way to look at the rule in the NSX Manager UI is that, rules go from top down and categories go from left to right. So you can see it is default deny. And what it has picked up is that, for these four VMs to communicate amongst themselves and the rest of the world, you need common services like AD, NTP, and DNS. So it has factored that in. It has also identified a backup job happening as well, because if we stop the backups, there'll be bigger problems to solve. For the inter-VM communication, these are the rules that need to be in place. If there is human knowledge which is beyond what it is, advising us to enforce as a policy, we can click on each of this cog to override this. We can even, look at the graph as well by looking at, how all of these virtual machines hang together and what is the flow symmetry of that. So I then go in, and what it'll do is it'll basically tell us which policy, under which policy you want to drop this rule, and we will publish. In a real world environment, you would run multiple discoveries and do it at scale. Once we do that, the legend changes. So we now have block flows from public to these, virtual machines. And then, there are green inter VM communication allowed flows as well from that perspective. And that is, how we do microsegment 1, 2, and 3. And later on, I'll explain to you how we have created the new workflow, which is called distributed firewall 1, 2, 3, 4 in a minute. Now, the fact we've got so much data in this, ecosystem, we can actually generate segmentation report. So segmentation report is an opportunity to establish how your VCF environment looks like from a security perspective. And the report is very, very comprehensive in nature. So the report will basically give you a view around, we analyzed last 7 days of flows. This is the number of VMs and number of ESXi hosts. And it's looking at all the best practices and KPIs that we want customers to adapt in order to have a, consistent and consistent security architecture end to end. It'll give you a risk score, and it'll basically look at, how your security posture looks like from a vDefend perspective. It'll also then give you a score around, if you continue to adopt these best practices, your risk profile will go up and down as well. And it looks at, all those things that were in the previous screen, but from a different angle. And then this report can go in, a lot of pages and start to look at, light chains and blast radius and things. So that was a demo, a quick demo to show you, how things hang together. Now, how did we achieve that? So you would deploy security services platform, which is our, data lake. And then you would start to activate different services, starting from security intelligence. Sorry, yep.
Yeah, you've got a couple of questions
Okay. Sorry.
Around latency and encrypting and de-encrypting flows and the impact of that. I wanted you to answer that because there's a
that's absolutely fine. Sorry, I was not looking at the questions. Yeah, absolutely. I'll answer them right now. There are a few questions. So basically, first question is how much network latency, right? For distributed firewall, we don't really see any network latency because everything is in line. That architecture has existed for a while. Now, when it comes to IDS, IPS, yes, what we do is we normally basically prescribe it'll take 10% additional, CPU, not memory. And what that means is that your VM to host consolidation will drop slightly, and that's where you do the sizing. In the later versions of NSX and vDefend, we've added more control around, how you handle that. So what that means is if you were able to host 20 VMs on a single host, now you're hosting 18. So there's a little bit of, sizing that you need to factor that in, but latency wise, everything's in line. And that is the messaging from, the NSX design team as well. most of the time. So I think I've answered that. So then there is another question: inspecting all encrypting, decrypting, analyzing, re-encrypting causes network latency. Okay. So basically, we only support TLS 1.2 today at the edge. We can do distributed TLS as well, but then there are different type of design scenarios we would take into consideration. Of course, the sizing is important. So this is where you would actually size your edges accordingly if you're doing, TLX inspection. Um, and this is more of a design consideration, but yes, absolutely, we factor all of those elements in. Uh, and you then sometime pick up, segments or clusters of where you want that type of capability, or you just want everything. So we see customers having a mixed bag where you have distributed firewall with IDS, IPS, or just have distributed firewall in some areas, or it is a combination of distributed TLS, um, uh, from that perspective. So yeah, there are, but how much we have prescribed all the sizing guidelines on the Broadcom documentation from that perspective. Does SSP support multi-tenancy, right? So SSP does not support multi-tenancy today. I don't know what multi-tenancy means. So my understanding is SSP is mapped to an NSX manager today. So it has one-to-one mapping with NSX manager, not with the workload domain, because an NSX manager can span amongst multiple workload domains as well, depending on the design you have. So fast forward into future, I've been told by the product management that end of this year, we will multiplex where you would have one SSP servicing multiple NSX manager. What will be that ceiling? I don't know. And since I'm not a product manager, I can't really talk about numbers and everything. But right now, today, the guidance is that it's one-to-one. So you would deploy an SSP in management domain, and then you would deploy an SSP in your workload domain to provide you with that, end-to-end security story, that the type of demo that I basically showcased. Um, and is there any other question? Okay, right. Most of them have been answered. In other words, can I offer this as a service in VCF9? I mean, there are multiple ways to interpret your question. So I guess you can offer it. So this is role-based access as well. The question is, who do you want to expose this data, right? Because there could be a very intimate detail that you don't want to reveal. Typically, we see that stays with, the CISO function. But again, it depends where you want to expose. But yes, there are controls in place to expose that information. So just conscious of time, and I've got some slides as well. Okay, so once we have deployed, security services platform, we activate services, right? So that is how it works. And SSP is an elastic architecture, and behind the scenes, it's using, container-based ecosystem. What we have introduced recently in SSP 5.1, the demo I showcased was based on SSP 5.0, but we are now in 5.1, is that we can do fileless malware. I was talking about, file-based malware earlier, which has existed for a long time. We can do rule analysis. So what we've seen with some of our big customers is that mistakes can be made. The whole remit of using VCF with, VCF networking is that it's an API-based system. And when we speak to some of our very, very big customers, they have created their own API processes and API gateways where the developers come in and consume, the VCF architecture. And that architecture is basically engulf, story scenarios as well. So basically, the security side is all covered. So for example, if someone requests like a 3-tier architecture, it will have the right, security groups and security tags, and the security is, given and offered there as a default. So what we've seen is that as a result of that, multiple teams doing different things, you can actually end up with, a lot of chaos from a rule perspective. And sometimes if you're not following the best practice, you may hit system-wide, firewall rules and things. So we've created rule analysis as well, which I'll cover that in a minute. And then the security journey is the one that we've actually created, and then continuous segmentation monitoring was there, and we've actually expanded on that as well. So what is the distributed firewall 1, 2, 3, 4 process, right? So basically, the same story. Where do I start my journey? What is my current security posture, and how can I secure my application? So this is the stages that we are trying to underpin. So the first thing is infrastructure services protection, leading to environment protection, and that is what we're classifying as, the whole journey to macro segmentation, leading into micro segmentation. It's natively built into security intelligence, this workflow to assist the customer. So week one, segmentation assessment. Few days you should be able to do shared services protection, leading into environment zone protection, and then micro segmentation, right? So from macro to micro segmentation is the view. You start with segmentation, journey. So it gives you an immediate view of where you are with your security. So in this particular illustration, very low score, and we effectively, ideally want customers to be in the green zone in that, RAG status you see. So here we will go and calculate the score, and basically it'll just give you a score where you are, and we can generate report. This is actually from a real customer type of scenario where we ran, where just by running the report highlighted there were 36,711 at risk entry points, with lot blast radius and how many unprotected unique flows they had. So it is a real customer based uh, illustration of what you're looking at right now. So once we've done the segmentation assessment, you have to, of course, wait for some of the flows that are gathered up to like 7 days. And then we can look at, shared infrastructure protection. So we can look at, what are the common services in my infrastructure. And in that, what we've done is that we can actually do a pull from your CMDB system as well. And what we have seen is that we would start to make sense of the tags, the naming convention that you use, so that we make your life easier. The workflow will factor that in, and once we run that type of assessment, it will start to give you a view of the DNS, UDP, LDAP services. And in the previous illustration, you saw that we will also then pick up LDAP server or an NTP server on any common service type of artifact which your CMDB may not have, and then security intelligence will highlight that there is actually an anomaly. You did not ingest it in your actual CSV file. So what we can do is we can look at auto discovered versus untrusted, and the recommendations that traffic rule needs to be locked and things like that. So that is infrastructure protection. The zone protection is where we start to go into dev, DMZ, prod type of segments, and provide different type of controls. So for example, you may want to creep some traffic or leak some traffic from prod to dev uh, because of many reasons. Sometimes you may have a UAT process that asks you to do that. You may need DMZ access into dev or prod as well. So we add controls, and the system basically helps you identify that, so that you can actually look at those recommendations from that perspective. And we then go into the application microsegmentation. So at this stage, we are now utilizing the tags you have provided. And if you don't have the tags, then the system would, recommend those as well. So billing can only talk to IT and records and assets. And now we have, granular control at per VNIC level, as well as, if the traffic is going from the edges to different type of, ecosystem. So now you have full east, west, and north, south control, where we're looking at those artifacts. So something like this would start to emerge, where we have the records and IT monitoring, that where the traffic is allowed, where there's a rogue server. So we can look at Security Explorer inside Security Intelligence to make sense of that information, and then have an iterative process to continue to refine it as well, right? So that is how it works. So the stages are there. So moving from macro to micro segmentation, something we introduced. Now, rule analysis is quite an important one. So when we look at the rule analysis, and it can happen, as a mistake as well, because we are human, irrespective of how good your API systems are and processes and blueprints and things like that, irrespective of what front-end technology you're using, like Ansible, Terraform, or even VRA, mistakes can be right? So made, and that's the reason we created that, where we can look at duplication. So duplicated rule. We recently ran an assessment where for the financial sector, there's a requirement from the DORA to basically qualify and prove that these firewall rules are being hit and they are fit for purpose, right? So firewall rule analysis basically underpins a lot of those type of compliance type requirements and asks, and from an audit perspective as well. So we're looking at duplication, redundancy, consolidation, contradiction, shadow rules, permissive irrelevance. So managing a vast number of firewall rules can lead to inefficiencies, conflict, security gaps, and clutter. Exactly what I've just explained. So what we do is we look at duplications. For example, two rules have the same exact configuration and same action. Contradiction is two rules have exact same configuration but different actions. So basically, one's allow, others reject. It's all amazing if you have deny all everywhere, but one allow any can actually destroy the whole compromise the system. So the whole idea is that you can have a positive mindset from a security perspective to have a consistent view from that. Same for redundancy, shadowing, and consolidation. It is all centered around how we create security groups and harness, the security, the firewall rules inside, NSX or vDefend ecosystem. Right. So I'm going to cover this slide, but I'm just looking at if there's any questions. So there's a question: SSP have integration for ITSM ticket tool, generate incident SIEM. Okay, we do have SIEM, so we do curation of the log and push it to a SIEM. And the ticketing system will be typically handled by another broker in between. This system particularly does not do that. However, we are looking at if one team is actually creating a workflow to create firewall rules, it goes through an authorization process where team B has to look at that workflow and then authorize before those firewall rules are published or enforced. So yeah, so for SIEM, yes, it's first class citizen, but for ticketing, that has to be another broker. ServiceNow, most people use it, or BMC Remedy or something like that, or Petrol. Right. So I started the conversation with the Home Office legislation, where they have created this, working document, which is effectively a deterrent. And what we do is we basically map out the same logic, and we have a function in VMware called the legal counsel, where we interface with GCHQ and NCSE. We were participants of that write-up as well that you saw early in the screen, and you can look it up in in your own time on the Home Office consortium. And what we are looking at is that document underpins the NIST framework for ransomware defense lifecycle that talks about identification, protection, detection, and response. So we map it to our technology stack in the vDefend. And what we say is that if the bad guy was so clever, or irrespective of these systems were in place, if the damage has been done, we have VMware Live Recovery to recover from that data set. VMware Live Recovery has an EDR sensor, which is carbon black. And what it does is it basically maintains regular snapshots of that virtual machine over time. And if you want to recover a particular snapshot, it will tell you that, don't recover this one because this is already compromised. And you're basically bringing this machine back to life. This image back to life means you are, reincarnating that virus or that Trojan. So it is a very, detailed solution. So mapping out to, that compliance document that I talked about, we can do the identify, protect, detect, respond, leading to the recovery side as well. What we also offer is that we've got different type of vDefend experience days. So we have VCF experience day, where we talk about the end-to-end inner workings of VCF, how we would stand up a VCF ecosystem. We then have expert-led workshop that are centered around how VCF networking works. So it's typically run by Andy, who's also on the call, and my colleague Richard. And then we have another experience day which I run, which is a full-on all-day experience day, where you go hands-on into all of these modules. And the idea is that if you know nothing about vDefend, the expectation is at the end of the day you are comfortable to basically do chalk and talk around this whole architecture and map it out to how it will fit in your organization. So if you're interested in a vDefend experience day, speak to your core team. We can share the dates with you. or if you can gather up to like 10 to 15 people and you want me to come on site, I'm happy to run it on the day. So there are some requirements for that to do that. But on that note, we're top of the hour, and thank you so much for staying and listening to me, and thank you so much for asking the questions. I don't see any open questions, but yeah, thank you and have a great day.